Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray,
And I'm Chris.
and today we're heading down a rural road in Columbus County, North Carolina, to a bridge, a small bridge in the middle of nowhere that is home to one of North Carolina's most chilling legends. And Chris, it's called Heartbeat Bridge.
Yeah, and Heartbreak Bridge is one of those things, you sound like it, and it actually sounds like a love story, a movie by or a book by Nicholas Sparks or something like that. Heartbeat Bridge, where two lovers come together and they find just love and happiness. And yet,
You've got the
this
wrong
is
bridge,
the
Chris.
I've got the wrong bridge
Got
because
the
this
wrong
is
bridge.
this is not that love story. Rather,
No.
this is a very scary, grisly story that takes place. As you know, we're in Spooktober, and we're talking about those haunted stories, haunted scenes. And this week, once again, we're pretty close to our own neck of the woods, and one of those places that is still able to be accessed if you're daring and if you're willing. And for me, I am not willing and nor am I daring. I am not interested in going to this place um, because it deals with a swamp, it deals with murder, and it deals with the removal of a heart. And you put all of that together, and it's just not the Nicholas Sparks feel good story of the year. Rather, it takes a dark and haunted turn. So, Ray, this is right up your alley. And I know you love stories like this. Makes your heart beat a little faster.
It does. And I'll tell you, in preparation for this episode, I hit Google Maps. Google Maps can be your best friend when you can't or don't want to get on the road and go looking for a place like this. And man, I'm glad I didn't because it took a little while, probably a half hour or more to find it. And once I found it, you're talking about unimpressive. The location is it's in Columbus County over Beaver Dam Swamp, which took me a minute to find that. And it's old, just part of Chair Factory Road. And I'm going to give our listeners the coordinates here real quick, Chris, so they can go to Google Maps and pull it up. So the coordinates are 34.1734 78.7037. Those are the coordinates so you can see what is called in this legend Heartbeat Bridge. And it is a small bridge, looks to be two lane. The road, the best of my ability to see, looks like it is not paved. And it is in the middle of nowhere. When I say the middle of nowhere, there are no power lines, there are no street lights. This is all woods, and I can imagine at 10, 11, 12, 1, 3 o'clock in the middle of the night, this is one scary spot. I mean, you drop me off in a car at this spot in the middle of the night, I'm not going to have a good time.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that this area in southeastern North Carolina is known for is swampy areas. You have, of course, the Cape Fear River. You start getting into green swamp and black swamp, and there's just so many different swampy areas. And that just reminds me of an old movie way back when, I think called Swamp Thing or something like that.
Yeah,
And
I remember that.
where you got these creatures. So just that in general makes it not a great place to be, especially at night. But then the other thing that comes over is, you have this bridge that has a chilling story of basically where an individual was a young girl was visibly murdered, and as she was murdered, what basically happens is that her heart is cut out from her body here at heartbeat. I can't even
If
say
you
it. I'm
want to
so
say
scared.
Heartbreak Bridge,
I
which
do. I want to say Heartbreak Bridge and Heartbeat Bridge. And so what happened is, this murderer, he cuts out the heart of this girl and then tosses it over into the swampy area, and it's just grisly just hearing about that, thinking about that, and then you add to the story of what happens after that, when you get into the haunted things. And there's a variety of stories as to what actually happened, whether it was, someone who was chasing somebody with a knife or someone that was basically driving together and they stopped at the bridge. So, Ray, there's all kinds of stories as to how it happened, but the reality is that the lore goes that it did happen and the heart was cut out and thrown over into the swampy area.
Yeah, and the ghostly part is it's said that if you go to the bridge at night, cut off your car, it is a even though it's rural in the middle of the nowhere, it is an actual road. So, pull off if you're going to go it, pull off the side of the road, make sure you watch for traffic and all of that kind of stuff. But the legend is if you're there on the bridge, you hear the heartbeat. You hear a heartbeat, and that is supposedly related to this murder that happened many moons ago. And I was trying to sort of, Chris, nail this down to a particular year or a particular event. Could not do it. Um, it seems to have started in the 1990s. But there's not really any clear event that happened that triggered this legend or lore. But most tragically, Chris, is that in 2023, this was very tragic. The body of a young woman was found in the water near the bridge. And a local man from Whiteville, which is north of this area, was charged with her murder. But it's the legend predates that particular event. So this event, whether the original lore is true, whether the original story behind Heartbeat Bridge or Heartbreak Bridge is true, it is a bridge that has an eerie sensation to it, but also it is a bridge that has a tragic recent past associated with it.
Yeah, and from I think what I was reading, that is the only known victim, if you will, that has been found near that bridge. But I think the thing that, and I'm not a psychologist, but I do know that one of the things that happens is if you're told something that when you go to that particular place, then your brain somehow begins to make you the sensory experiences that you're feeling it, you're experiencing it. And so I think what has happened is as this legend has been passed down over and over and over, you have these individuals who go to these places and the fear, what's that? My heart's beating out of, my heart beats out of my body or something like that, or you can hear the thumping in your ears, and so when we feel that we are in a dangerous position or in a scary spot, that what can happen is our body begins to have these reactions to that. And once again, forgive me, listeners, I'm not the psychologist on that, but I just know that when you have that vibe, maybe what's starting to happen is they begin to hear these sounds. The further, let's say you park the car, and you start walking to the bridge, and as you get closer and closer and closer, where you get more and more nervous because whether you believe it or you don't believe it, the reality is that, story has it that something happened there. And there's been some strange things that have occurred on that bridge in addition to the heartbeat. They have seen some strange phenomenon, kind of like what we talked about in our previous episode. There's been headlights that have been seeming to come at them while they're at the bridge. Then all of a sudden, those headlights disappear, or they believe that they see a car with the lights on, and it's non-driver in the car. It's just like a car coming down, and so just a frightening thing. And I do, I read an article the other day that was saying that if for individuals who watch horror movies at night before they go to bed, that they're like 60% likely to wake up in the middle of the night. I mean, doesn't take a rocket science to figure out why, but I just think those endorphins and things that start going on, the last thing you remember when you go to sleep is the dreams begin to be created. And so you think about those things, and we're getting closer to Halloween. And I can tell you that I don't like Halloween just in general, as I've said before on this podcast, but I can assure you I'm not dressing up and going to Heartbeat Bridge no matter what. There's not a dare in the world, there's not any amount of money that would get me to go in the middle of night to this place.
No, it's too far out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, when you look on Google Maps, once you do the coordinates, it's just too far out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I like a good spook, I like a good scare, but this one is a bit much because, if something happens to you, a heart attack or something, have a heart attack on Heartbeat Bridge. If something like that happens, it's going to take a while for any help to get where you are. So that's it's a little too far on me. But when I was thinking when you were talking just there, Chris, about how the last two that we've looked at have been rural country roads. The last one was in Pender County. This one's Columbus County. And I don't think Pender and Columbus touch, do they? I don't believe
Yes,
they
you
do.
got Bladen. I think up top there might be some
Yeah.
connection there.
Well, these are both in the same area. The story of the pale face, the crawler last week, or the rake is what it was called, right? The rake, and this week, Heartbeat Bridge. These are both stories about, really country roads in the middle of the night, and just the fear of, maybe running into something on one of these roads in the middle of the night that you don't know what it is, that's not human, or hearing a spooky noise or whatever the case may be. I think these type of stories, these type of lores feed into that. So Chris, I got to ask you a question because this is the first one of these Halloween episodes. We've been doing this podcast since 2020. So I want to ask you, we've been doing these Halloween episodes for a while. I think this is the first one you've ever recommended. How did you hear about Heartbeat Bridge? Because until you recommended it, I had never heard of it, to be honest.
I was actually at a football game in Whiteville, and I was talking about our podcast and history you didn't know but should, and was just explaining to them, just what we do and how we do it, and it was like, what do y'all talk about? What are some of the topics you talk about? And I started just basically saying, we talk a lot about just weird
Mhm.
historical things, but also just some relevant stuff. I said it's very much history centered, but it's also we like to explore different aspects of North Carolina. And I said, we've got October coming up, and that you like to talk about haunted things. And I
Yep.
said, I just don't get it. And I said, he always gives me a hard time because I just don't have any really stories. He said, well, I'll tell you a good old story. And so it was a local guy that told me about Heartbeat Bridge. And so I said, okay, well, I'm not into the spooky stuff and the scary stuff, but I'll get a look at it. And he said, no, listen, I'm telling you something. It's real.
Yeah.
This isn't some made up thing. This he says, I'm born and raised here, still here, and I have never and I will not go to that bridge even during the day. He even stated, and I didn't get deep into this, but he says there's even some red spray paint or red paint or something that's
There is.
on the bridge, and that some people believe that has to do with blood and other things like that. And I said, okay, that's too much for me. So this is a local person who has subscribed to the legend to the point where he knows the roads
Yeah.
to and from, and has said that he wants nothing to do with him.
Yeah, I'm looking at the picture of the bridge. And yes, there is from the surface, it looks like graffiti. um Green and red paint on both sides of the bridge. The bridge, like I said, it may be two lane. It's hard to tell if it's two lane or one lane. It looks very narrow. But both sides have those cement um guardrails on them, not solid all the way down, but it's across the top and then open toward the bottom. And you do see green and red paint on both sides that looks like it has been marked on. So that's an interesting story. So you have a local person who, knows the legend, knows the story, and says, I'll have nothing to do with it. It reminds me, Chris, of where I grew up. We had a train story, where you have one of these things where you go out on the track and you see the man allegedly looking for his head, and I never went out there, Not simply because, I might see a man looking for his head, but also it was not an area you would go out at night and go walking around, and all that stuff. So, but it's very interesting to hear from local people about things that they've, heard all their life or even experienced themselves.
Just goes the importance of telling about and talking about history. I mean, the way that it goes back to before there was technology and things of that nature. The way that history has been preserved is through oral storytelling, the ability to pass on these stories. And, that's how we remember it. This individual, he heard it from somebody who heard it from somebody, heard it from somebody. He'd known about it all his life. He's been in that area. So I think that just goes to show the power of telling stories and to talking about history, and which just is another reason for why we do what we do with this podcast. This podcast is an opportunity for us to hopefully encourage individuals to get excited about not just learning about history, but talking about history and talking about some unique aspects of history, or maybe a revisionist kind of history approach where you are looking at it from different angles. Because as long as we continue the story of telling the stories, then we know that it will be preserved. Because as we know, computers can crash, memories can fade, but the aspect of telling a story always remains. So I appreciate hearing the story from the voice of someone and being able to pass it on to someone else who I hope maybe somewhere down the way, our listeners will have the opportunity to say, hey, let me tell you about this unique little place down there in southeastern North Carolina, about Heartbeat Bridge and kind of what happens and what it means. Just another little story about history you didn't know but should.
Yeah, and it brings the possibility that I mentioned earlier that there's, no accounts in the media or anything about uh somebody being murdered here and having their chest, that their heart cut out. But you never know. It could be a story from, like you said, before media and before all of this, and it just sort of in the 1990s floated out away from Columbus County, something that maybe started there because of something that did happen, and the source has been lost, but the story remains. So, the question is, Chris, that we'll close on is Heartbeat Bridge haunted, or is it just haunted by our expectations? Maybe both are true. So the next time you're in southeastern North Carolina and you're in Whiteville, take a drive south down to Chair Factory Road, cut off the engine, cut off the lights, and walk out on the bridge and see if you hear a heartbeat. I'm
And
not,
leave us a comment about it because we won't be there.
I won't do it. Until next time, I'm Ray,
And I'm Chris.
and we'll talk to you later.